So I think it was the day before yesterday that I had mentioned Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, and I had talked about the way that the evolution of Leaves of Grass had become a model for a way of working that was in part serialization, but that brought an organic idea to serialization and growth, so that my work, and not just my literary work, not just examples of textualities and writings and letters and forms, jotted down on a page, but my performances and sections of other kinds of work, and even paintings, the idea of painting over or painting again, not painting the same image, but either painting over the actual materiality of a canvas, or taking that canvas and turning it into a sculpture or some other transformation. But these transformations and these evolutions and growths, as well as serialities, I had first become conscious of in recognizing the history of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. And I think the other day that I mentioned Roy Harvey Pierce, who was a kind of new critical professor of English and American literature at UCSD when I was doing my undergraduate work there. Had written a preface. I think I had said that he made an argument, a case, for the 1855 edition of Leaves of Grass, being the quintessential, quintessential is the wrong word, I don't know what the right word is, but being in his mind the most fully realized, vision of Leaves of Grass, and I think that's an error. I think he wrote that the 1860 edition was the profoundest example of literary merit in Whitman's veriform and various, productions of this particular evolving and transmuting and changing and metastasizing work. That also included, I had mentioned that, Whitman, kept expanding the work, but there were also numerous edits and removals as well, in various moments and periods of time. And I had just recently produced a work in which I gave a kind of reading of a poem that uses the idea of editing as a way of articulating a particular relationship to a moment, so that you can imagine that, you have this set of work, and that the context of a reading becomes more relevant to the performance of the work than the initial intention of the work itself. Obviously Roy Harvey Pierce didn't have an understanding of that kind of performance and performativity, and the other objection that I would have made, to those kinds of readings of Whitman is that they take this position of the universalizing of subjectivity and the subject position in ways that we have mostly come to be critical of, and that I've explored from a variety of different political perspectives in our need, to fully embody and materialize these subjectivities behind these artistic performances and artistic artifacts. All right, so I wanted to explore that idea of that kind of making and that evolution and that process and that change, and I wanted to do it in light of a set of performances called sortings. And so I thought I would begin with the origin of sortings, and talk about how sortings grew out of communication and relationship to other artists' work and my own experiences and being sorted and wanting to critique some of the ways that sorting works, both in education and in structures and organizations of economy. So what we're looking at here is an image on the internet that is a photograph by Becky Cohen for a work called Initiation Dream. And it's a collaboration with Pauline Oliveros. Now, I'm assuming that the image of the forehead that we're looking at is an image of Pauline Oliveros's forehead. And the reason that I'm using this photograph to talk about this work that I want to look at, called This Is Not, well, it's various, really. So before getting too much into this is not, I'll just say of this particular image and this particular photograph, that this is not the photograph that I would have chosen to begin this discussion of this is not. However, I couldn't find a photograph of Becky Cohen's. Now, I should have mentioned that, well, I'll mention it later, but I couldn't find a photograph of Becky Cohen's of the work that I did want to utilize. And I don't even remember what that work was called, and there's no evidence of it on the internet. And art scholars and photography scholars will probably be more aware of the history of the evolution of this work than I am. But in the very early 80s, my friend John had a job working for Becky Cohen as an artist assistant, and occasionally when the work was more than he could accomplish on his own, Becky Cohen would ask me to assist as well. And at this time, Becky was married to Harold, and it's actually through Becky Cohen that I had become first acquainted with Harold and with Aaron. So one of the invitations for work was to pose for a kind of photo documentary of a kind of performance art piece that Becky had created or was in the process of creating, and I don't remember if it had a title, but I remember the basic structure. And it was this performance piece that I posed for that grew into sortings and the seriality of sortings and the various manifestations of sortings. I think I'll say it may or may not have been, but looking back on on the origins of sortings, I can see a lot of elements that that began with perhaps ideas that belong to this kind of way of working in performance art. You know, this like very Fluxus edge of performance art, right? Like that Becky Cohen's piece that I have yet to fully describe, you know, embodied in that work like certain kinds of you know, gestural acts, like Yoko Ono's work embodied as well. So what this piece involved was simple exchanges, and one figure, you know, one character in the performance would have in his hands or her hands an object, and another performer would have a different object, and you would exchange these objects. Say you would exchange, say, a lamp and a book, or a hammer and a vase, or, you know, different physical objects like that. And I still think, you know, this was one of my favorite pieces of hers, and I've looked at, you know, on the web some of the other work that she's done, and I know that she's interested in these issues of you know, environmental destruction now, and we all are, and ways to save the planet, and ways to motivate individuals to want to make a change about the way they do things. But this work really had an impact on a way of thinking for me, and I guess I imagined these exchanges of objects as being like pure, right? So unadulterated by like systems of economy and oppression and you know, imbalanced resources and the way that exchanges and money become tools for, you know, big industry and the oppression of a large part of the population. And, you know, so I guess I thought of the purity of these exchanges as a kind of like Edenic view of the idea of economy and communication, right? That is so far from what we actually experience as an exchange that it becomes the image of a dream. So I guess that distance between these utopian, idealized, Edenic exchanges and my experience of the world and the way that it was organized into hierarchies of sortings and exchange, you know, gave it this kind of dream quality. And maybe that's, you know, one of the reasons why I chose this image that I couldn't, because there were other images of hers that I could find, but none of them referenced, you know, this idea of the dream. They either, you know, the semantic field was either garden or something else. So so that has something to do perhaps with the selection of this image, and the story, you know, of my relationship to this piece that whose either title I can't remember or which had no title, and the history of which, you know, I know very little about, other than, you know, I was part of its initial inception. But you know, this series of Edenic, you know, utopian exchanges and communications. But you know, Fluxus always had that. You know, very rarely like was it gritty, you know, or realistic. It was always abstracted, and it was always utopian in that way. And you know, I don't dislike utopias. I actually really very much like them, and I like projections of a hopeful future. But I don't tend in my work, you know, to produce, you know, too many utopian visions. I'm more a revealer, I guess, of certain kinds of structural deficiencies in our society than I am an envisioner of a utopian dream. I can be, and I have certainly always wanted to be, and I think one of the reasons that I'm not particularly good at it is because of certain kinds of limitations that I have always had in making these sort of well-wrought objects, you know, like the well-wrought urn, right? So there's a kind of art, like even if it has a wabi-sabi aesthetic to it, that that depends upon an aesthetic of either, you know, simplicity or elegance or just, you know, being well done. And Yoko Ono was very good at this, you know, work that she had performed as early as the 60s. You know, she was able to later package in these kind of wonderful boxes and with these descriptions and photographs and sell these objects, right, that were very well designed and well made. And it was that craft, you know, that allowed the sale and the production of this, you know, very extended, right, economic revenue from these pieces that, you know, she had begun decades, you know, earlier, and maybe, you know, got packaged into book form or some other form, you know, much later. So maybe that was why, you know, that the dream of the sort of utopian artistic future was less accessible to me than it was to, you know, Fluxus artists and others working out of that tradition, which, you know, Becky Cohen didn't always work out of that tradition, but this particular piece did work out of that tradition. And I always thought of Pauline Oliveros as, you know, partly working out of those realms of performativity, although there was certainly something else going on, you know, in the work that she did that became, you know, engaged with, you know, Earth and the feminist aspects of the engagement with Earth and all of that, you know, I really think exceeds the boundaries of, you know, what Fluxus was capable of doing. But in any case, my relationship to Becky's piece didn't end there. There was more. So, you know, as a photographer, well, my friend was the photography assistant, and he would do the darkroom work. But as anyone who's ever done darkroom work knows, if you're developing your own negatives, right, from film stock, and you know, and you can do this if it's black and white. If it's color, you really need a machine. But you know, you can add the chemicals, and you can do this in a dark room, and you can process the film and you know, turn it into negatives. But if you do this, there's inevitably you know, some damage and some infidelity done to the negative. And no matter how good a processor you are, they're going to be like these little scratches or poorly processed spots on the negative. And when you print the image from these imperfect, right? And it's not wabi-sabi really at this point, or it could be. It could become part of the aesthetic. It could become like a wabi-sabi. But if you're really interested in the craft, right, and this utopian dream of this craft and these beautiful images, then you have to do something about the imperfection of this negative and its relationship to your prints. Because in your prints, anything that is an infidelity in the negative is gonna, you know, come out in what you finally produce as a photographic image. And so, you know, Becky had these very beautiful images of these exchanges, but some of them, in fact, maybe all of them, that my friend John, you know, had processed, had a little spot or a little scratch or something that revealed the nature of the media, right? And there was this desire for a kind of transparency and of the image in the way that, you know, realism produces an image without calling attention to itself. So if I go over here, for example, and I start showing you the description that's on this page, right? And I show you the search bar, and I show you information about the website. I've called, you know, attention to the way that this image is contextualized, and I could even find spots on my computer screen if I looked closely enough that, you know, maybe that had dust on them. I don't know if I can find any. Or I could show you the cursor that I'm using to move this image around. I can show you, I don't even know what all of this is. This must be my, I don't know what this is. This must be a recent search inventory. Oh, the Kangal Shepherd dog is it's a huge dog, but I have a dog that looks an awful lot like a Kangal, but he's small. He's only about 80 pounds. That's Leo. But these dogs are huge. They're well over 150 pounds, and so we refer to Leo as Min Kang, which is, you know, kind of an inside joke. But anyway, I can show you all kinds of things that, you know, break, right, the reality of the image, and you know, Becky wasn't, you know, strictly a realist. Obviously, the very fact of framing this forehead in the manner that she does, you know, violates a lot of, at least, cinematic conventions, right? And probably quite a few conventional photography conventions as well. And then you have like the stray hair, you know, which is you know, I think part, you know, of a feminist way of looking at the world, really, right? Like a refusal to discount any of the aspects of our material existence. The stray hair is like a statement against that kind of like Roy Harvey Pierce universalism that he produces in his reading of well, women, right? I mean, you know, just the way it is, and the facts of our bodily existence, and this like correctedness of it. But still, even within that, you know, even within that epistemological construct and ideological expression of the human body, right? There was this desire to produce these you know, well-made images, and for that purpose, Becky had acquired these inks of various hues, because if you, again, know anything about processing film, you know that when you process them, you process an emulsion, which has a chemical reaction to the ingredients of this substance, has a chemical reaction to light, and then the application of chemicals visually enhance the effect of light upon the substance, and materialize it into you know, a series of what are like dots, right? So if not here, because this is digital, right, because I'm using the computer, but if you had the actual photograph and I went close enough, you would see the dots that go into the representation of all of these different facets and textures of skin and hair light and shadow and depth, and that create, you know, the illusion of this image. And these dots, you know, come in different shades, right? So that some of them are, you know, nearly black, and some of them are gray, and then there are hues, and depending on how the film got processed, you might have a sepia tint, or you might have some other tint. And so she had these inks, and you had to match the inks. And if there was a spot, which I can't find one here, oh, actually I can. There's some down here at the bottom. See, it's the edge of this image here. Let me, if I bring it over there, it's worse. So see here, there's some white right there. So this isn't really such a big deal, but had it been, you know, over here, you know, Becky would have wanted a correction to be made. And so I was, you know, hired and acquired again to use these inks and make these corrections. And Becky was very explicit about how to do this. You know, don't try to paint it, because it's made up of dots, and that'll make it weird. So, you know, choose the right ink and then just put a dot. Now later, and you won't be able, I didn't prepare again, so you won't be able to see it, but later I became very good at dots and in my own painting. But that's required, you know, some time. And this isn't even the best example, but if I had more light, I could make that more visible. But at this time, not so much. So my performance of correcting these images was actually pretty poor. And you know, after the first day, you know, looking at the work that I did and some of the smudges, and some of it was even worse than the original infidelity in the image. You know, I got sorted out of that project, right? So it's like, okay, that's you're not good at that. So we're gonna have, you know, John do that work. So my lack of talent in producing these, you know, well-wrought corrections, you know, sorted me out of that particular project, you know. And there was certainly no malice in it, you know, or anything like that. But, you know, this is, you know, simply the way that, you know, our physical, you know, example of our physical embodiments and abilities, the way that they participate in organizing, right, and in forming our relationship to social spaces, to economies, to projects, to work, right? Okay, so here's a different example. And then I'll begin talking about sortings. So when Harold Cohen hired John and I to cut up tile for a project that he was doing in Stanford, which was a mural. Now, Aaron had already drawn the outline for this mural, and so the drawing was done by AI, but the work, the physical work, was, you know, going to be performed by human entities. And because it was a mural, he had to have these pieces of broken tile. So he hired John and I, you know, through Becky, you know, to perform this work of cutting tile. And the way that you do it is you have a piece of ceramic tile, and you have a scoring machine, which is like it's like it has a what would you call it? It's very much like a paper cutter, but not with a blade that you pull down, but rather one of those paper cutters that that has a pulley that you pull across and slices the paper with a mechanism that is automatically set to a particular angle, usually 90 degree angle. So the scorer is like a little wheel that has a diamond cutter on it, and you run this across the section of tile, and say you have like a square tile, like a tile like shaped like this particular photograph, then you would run you would score 1, you would score 2, you would score 3, and what this does is it puts a mark on the glass here. And then you have another tool, and it's similar, you know, to a kind of what would you say, modified pliers, I guess, with a flat edge, and then you use that modified pliers to break off each scored piece. So you would start on this end if your pliers is in your right hand, and you would break off a length here, and then you would break off the next length here, and so then you have these rectangular lengths of tile. And then you take another tool, which is also, you know, something like a pliers or a clippers, and you that has a sharp end, and you break the piece this way, right? All right, so this was our job, to create these tiles, and Harold from the very outset had said that, you know, we want them, you know, they should be about this size, but we want a variety of, you know, different shapes. So don't be too picky about the way that you do it. So I just did it. I didn't think much about the instructions, and I just did it. And I think the same for my friend John. He just, you know, did it and didn't pay too much attention to the instructions. And you know, Harold came back, and, you know, he looked at our pieces, and some of them that John had produced were too good. They were too regular. And I guess when you're doing mosaic and tile, the point is that they're irregular because it makes it, you know, more interesting. And mine, just by virtue of the fact that, you know, I wasn't a particularly talented measurer, or and I wasn't, you know, good at exactness, right? Mine were had a lot of character. They were very irregular and weird shapes, and Harold was looking at the box, and he goes, well, these are very good, but these, you know, you need to, and then he showed John how to take the third tool, right? Well, the first tool, the scoring tool, you didn't have to go exactly straight, right? You could go on an angle, right? You know, theta, one of the descriptors for theta is that it means angle. It means a lot of different things, but one of the things for theta is that it means angle. So if your angle is always perpendicular, you know, it's going to give you one thing. But see, now look, if I turn the camera, I change the angle, right? You know, I can make the image in some ways geometrically more interesting by changing the perspective. So I've always, you know, been that way, and I really am almost unable to not be that way. So you know, he showed John how to do this, and he showed John how to break these pieces in different ways and make them different sizes. But John really had to think about it, right? He really had to think every time he cut a piece to make it irregular. It's like my relationship with rhythm. People can be off, you know, in rhythm, but and I always had a hard time understanding that. Why aren't they on the beat? Well, I can do offbeat too, but it's always a proportional relationship to the main thrust of the rhythm, right? Or it's always a multiple of that rhythm. But to be really off and not playing in time, I can't do it. So I can kind of understand by analogy how one would have a hard time being irregular. but it's never been an issue for me with this kind of making. So my production was much faster, just by virtue of the fact that that I was not good at being exact. So in this instance, you know, my particular way of being in the world, my particular physical abilities and lack of abilities, you know, really benefited my production of the making of this tile, in the same way that it got in the way of you know, correcting this image. So at this point, I'm gonna kind of switch to an image or a set of images from the production of a performance piece called This Is Not, you know, which was sorting, and that I believe, you know, or one could argue, began with, you know, my relationship to this work that of Becky's that I don't have an image of, but that was an example of exchanges, and I'll talk about that piece. All right, so here. Let me see if I can get this in a bigger form. All right, so here's an example of one of the outcomes of this work, This Is Not, which was a work about sorting. And it was a kind of performance art, and then it left a kind of trace of itself, although I don't have examples of the entirety of the trace. But it begins with, you know, the sense of myself as an embodied subject, and you know, what some of my abilities and limitations are. And it interrogates. So let's look at this idea of exchange. One subject, you know, exchanging something with another subject in Becky's piece, whatever that exchange piece was called or not called. And not a lot is getting in the way. You know, the ownership of the objects isn't questioned. Like, how did the one guy get the vase, or how did this woman acquire the ruler, or how did the objects of exchange, you know, get in the hands of those exchanging them? That's not interrogated. Or differences in the ability. Like, no, I don't remember in this piece like anybody ever stumbling and breaking one of the objects, which would have been interesting, right? But that's what I'm talking about in this utopia, that these objects, you know, there was a lot of givens, and there was a lot of dreamlikeness in the abstraction of them, that in my abstraction, I wanted to do something else, if you can even call it abstraction anymore. So in these sortings, the idea was to perform the use of a particular object that would either make my life easier or not make my life easier. And as I've mentioned, you know, one of the features of my subjectivity, my phenomenology, my embodiment as a human being is that there's a set of abilities and inabilities that belong to what I call dysgraphia, and it's not entirely just dysgraphia, but there are elements of dyscalculia and dyslexia as well. But the dyscalculia aspect is that it's very difficult for me to sequence numerical values or remember numbers or spell. The dysgraphia is it's very difficult for me to write by hand. And there are a lot of features that I've demonstrated in some of the pieces that involve the phenomenology and social relationships that are dependent upon you know, differences, and you know, specifically my exploration of the social ramifications and phenomenology of dysgraphia. So and, you know, and also the pain, you know, that belongs to, you know, certain aspects of having to do work that is expected of one when one doesn't have the physical or other, you know, kinds of ability to perform that work. Now, you know, I'm focusing on certain things that, you know, should emerge as, you know, values, semiotic values in relationship to, you know, work that, you know, my viewers have seen elsewhere, right? If you turn that W around, you get EM, you know, a suggestion of radium. Easier. So that looks a lot like life. So the idea was, you know, is this an object that makes my life easier, or is this not an object that makes my life easier? This is an object that makes my life easier. This is not an object that makes my life easier. And I would explore performances with a number of different objects. So, for example, in some discourses on dysgraphia, it says that, you know, just give the child a bigger pencil. So I would take a big pencil and I would try to write in a way, you know, that fit in the margins of the paper and that still performed all of the functions, you know, that the assignment specified, you know, and I, you know, just, you know, arbitrarily make rules for what that assignment would be with a big pencil and see if it, you know, did or didn't make my life easier. So you would have a performance with a regular size pencil, then you would have a performance with the big pencil. And the results of that, which I no longer have, were amusing, as you can well imagine. And to me, it was evidence that it disproved the big pencil idea. Giving a dysgraphic, I can't say, you know, that there's like this abstract universal idea of dysgraphia that is true and that belongs to, you know, the set of objects that exist in the world, and that a big pencil wouldn't help. But I can say this of myself. That idea is non-functional, meaning that, you know, a big pencil did not help me. So a big pencil was sorted into, you know, this is not an object that makes my life easier. Okay, so another example was a calculator. So, you know, so how would you perform this idea? This is not. Well, I wanted the statement, this is an object that makes my life easier, to be the basis for it. So in using a calculator, the first thing that I would do is I would sit down with a pencil and I would translate all of the letters in the statement, this is an object that makes my life easier, into numerical values. So obviously the T represents 20, right? The H represents 8, the I represents 9, and the S represents 19. So you add all of those together. So adding those together, you get 28 plus 19 plus 9 is 27. So 28 plus 27. That's what? 56 minus 1 is 57. I think that's correct. So that would be the first, you know, set of numerical values. So I would do the translation, and I would put the numbers over the letters, and then I would try to add these numbers. So I'd add them first as this, and the word, right? So I add all the values of the word, and I would get 57. Then I would do the next one. So that's 9 plus 19 is 28. So let's see, did I miscount this then? Well, I'm not going to go back and do it. But if I did miscount it, it's just, you know, giving you an example of like how this is a problem for me. But in any case, so let's just say let's just say it's 28. And so I would take this number 28 and I would add it to this number, and I would add it to the rest of the numbers that were designated in the statement. This is a device to make my life easier. And I would do this all by hand, right? So this like long columns of addition. And then I would like do the same thing, but I would have the calculator. And unfortunately, like the documentation of my work is always, somewhat sketchy, and as viewers of my pieces will realize, there's a lot of loss, right? The fact that this exists is just almost an accident. And I'll get to this piece, because this isn't the calculator piece, clearly, right? So I don't have examples of a big pencil that got sorted into this is not an object that makes my life easier. Or I don't have the examples, from the calculator piece that, that got sorted into this is an object that does make my life easier. I didn't put the does in, but, clearly a calculator helped. So on math, tests and examinations, where I could bring a calculator in and I was able to use a calculator, and that wasn't considered cheating, right? Then it's somewhat mitigated. And I didn't use it for big calculations like multiplication or division, because that was easy for me. But I used it for adding numbers, because it very much mitigated some of the issues of my dysgraphia. So when I was allowed to do that, which was very rarely, particularly in grade school and in high school, but when I was allowed to do that, which was like, again, I don't even remember one example in grade school in which one would have been allowed to do that. But it very much mitigated, some of my differences in my ability to perform sequencing and addition and subtraction of these, numerical values. And so I would sort that object. I would sort the calculator into this is an object that makes my life easier. Okay, so what you're looking at is the result of a performance with a typewriter, and there are many of us just pluck out or scratch out the keys with 2 or 3 or 4 fingers, and don't type the way that a professional typist does. But this was an attempt to type the way that a professional typist does, by repeating the statement, this is an object to make my life easier, and without looking at the keyboard. And then later I took the results of these typed processes. I took the results of this performance, and I cut it into pieces and Xeroxed it in different ways. And then later, when computers could do more complicated things, I added color and different things and blocked it out to make it look like different examples of art from different periods. Like this is sort of my idea of like Russian futurist abstraction, with these bold colors, or like the use of reduced color schemes, and I did different like modes of relationships to what one might see and say. So this has a very like Russian constructivist feel to it to me, but that was somewhat added later. But the initial work, these are all outlays or results of doing this typing this statement. This is an object to make my life easier. Sometimes it even actually like comes out, right? That's pretty amazing. This one could have begun before I put the blindfold on. I used a blindfold for this piece, as I have used blindfolds in other pieces to enhance and metaphorize, you know, embodiment, physical embodiment and processes. And I did that in this piece as well. Let's see if I can figure out how to get this to go forward. Here's another image from this piece. And then I combined it with some somewhat language poetry like work and other kinds of conceptual poetry that that I had done at various times. But the letrist images themselves are all from this particular work, This Is Not, which, you know, again was this performance of sorting these tools, right? Into either, you know, useful or unuseful categories. And then, you know, later transforming, you know, the results of this process of utilizing these tools into, here's another Russian constructivist looking one, transforming the results into some kind of visual art. Here's another one. This is all the letrist stuff, and the visual stuff is all from This Is Not. This is something else, but that got combined with it later. But that combination, again, you know, bears upon that combination and that reworking and that transformative quality of this process, right? That these images took on later, you know, kind of grows out of what was initially my understanding of Walt Whitman's organic and living way of transforming, you know, his work, and that included for me, you know, changes in technology, because this wouldn't have been, this kind of image wouldn't have been, you know, available to me when I began the work, but only became possible with the results of that work much later, you know, with computers and the development of different kinds of visual programs and ways of manipulating light within those programs, which when I produced this work as performance in the 1980s were not available. Even Aaron couldn't do it. And so that's part of the transformation. And that's the final page. But what I'm leading up to, and I think I've talked for a considerable length of time on this example of sorting, but what I'm leading up to is, you know, performing an extension of sortings and bringing in some of the issues that I've been talking about more recently in the talk pieces that I've been doing for the YouTube channel. And what I wanted to do was bring together two examples of sorting and based on things that I've been talking about recently. And one kind of sorting is going to be anagrammatical. And if you think about an anagram is the reorganization of the words in some string of words or sentences into a different string of words or sentences. And so if you think about this is not, there are a lot of other things that this is not or this is could represent. And I want to do this with some kind of arbitrary word, but with an object like that bears upon this idea of selecting something and seeing if it makes my life easier or if it doesn't make my life easier. So I had thought about selecting some object, perhaps from the refrigerator, or perhaps from the closet, or perhaps from the bathroom cabinet, or perhaps from a drawer, and then this object, hopefully would be inscribed with, a word or letters. If not, we could name it, say it was a set of car keys, you could call it car keys, and then these letters could be rearranged anagrammatically, and that would be an act of sorting, right? So this is my idea for this new piece, to sort, anagrams as examples of sorting. And I may have thought of this because I recently did a work responding or not responding to a response or not response on the part of an entity that belongs to the set, that we could call PRJ. And I had done work on the set that we could call PRJ before, which was and so doing that work was again kind of part of this evolving serial process that began with an idea of leaves of grass and has become a way of working for me, as well as other kinds of seriality have become ways of working, and set theory through Neumann has become a way of working as well, and hence the set of PRJs. But I guess maybe I was thinking about anagrams because one of the entities that belongs to the set of PRJs had done some translations of a poet that works primarily in anagrams, and so I thought, well, why not return to sortings and utilize that. And then because I had done some recent work and discussion of David Anton's distinction between story and narrative, I thought initially I had thought maybe I would sort the results of these anagrams into either story or narrative. But then I thought how problematic that is, and how misleading in some ways it would be, because the very act of reconstituting an expression as anagram already, if we use the serious investigation of narrative as psychological transformation, is always already there in Freud, right? This is part of the dream work, right? So the anagrammatical reconstitution of a form will already embody all these elements of displacement and compression and distortion that Freud talks about as being both the revealings of a kind of psychological depth that isn't available on the surface, but also a masking of that psychological depth. So if one truly believes that, then the act of dividing story and narrative in this process would be disingenuous, right? really, would get in the way, I think, of the connection between the way that recoding and decoding and sorting is always already belongs to the deepest and most narrative, that is the most psychologically significant aspects of the traumas of our lives, or the difficulties of our lives, or the embodiment of our realities, right? So so I think I would do it in some other way, and the results of the sortings of the anagrams, I could sort those into simply narrative and non-narrative. So this is in some way a description of a project that that I hope to complete relatively soon, and then sort of pair with this description leading up to that project, but also to be a demonstration of the way that the evolution of these kinds of transformations, right, have become the way that I do things, basically altogether as an artist. And if I don't get to that project, it could remain a project. Like I could package it. I could describe like what I wanted to do, and I could put it in this really nice box, and I could sell it on Amazon, and then it would be more like a Flexus project, right? But hopefully I'll get to it.